Before we begin, a quick note. This episode is brought to you ad-free thanks to my subscribers on Patreon. If you are hearing ads, they come from the website or service that you are using to access the podcast. Unfortunately, I have no control over those. It's the price of doing business online. Hopefully those platforms are not being too annoying today. Once again, thanks to my patrons for their generous support. In 1272 BCE, regnal year 21, Ramesses II announced a treaty with the Hittites. Simultaneously, the Hittite monarch Hattusili III announced his agreement with Ramesses. The two great kings promised unity and brotherhood, respect for one another's territories and vassals, mutual defense, and the extradition of any fugitives. Witnessed by gods and goddesses alike, with curses for those who violated the treaty, the agreement was a landmark in Egyptian-Hittite relations. What happened next? Having made their peace, Ramesses and Hattusili settled into a new phase of their relationship. For his part, the king of Egypt showed a marked enthusiasm for his new brother, quote-unquote. A set of letters written on clay tablets and excavated in the Hittite capital city reveal messages that Ramesses dispatched to the king of Hatti. Pharaoh was notably accommodating to his former rival. In some cases, Ramesses even offered to meet Hattusili in person. One letter says, quote, "Thus speaks Wasmuria Satepnaria, Ramesses II, the great king of the land of Egypt, to the great king of the land of Hatti, Hattusili. May you be well, and your troops, horses, and chariots be well, and all your land be well. The sun god and the storm god shall cause my brother Hattusili to see his brother Ramesses. May my brother come to me, and carry out the good proposal to meet me. One may look into the other's face, in the place where the king is upon his throne." End quote. Ramesses invited Hattusili to visit him in Egypt. This wasn't as generous as it sounds. If the offer were accepted, the king of Hatti would leave his residence in central Anatolia, travel all the way across Syria, Canaan, Sinai, before reaching the Egyptian delta and its royal city, Ramesses. The journey alone would take months, and there would probably be several weeks in Egypt for meetings and festivities. That was a long time for Hattusili to leave his court, his family, and his duties. Given how unstable Hittite politics had recently been, and how vulnerable the borders of their kingdom could be, you can imagine Hattusili was not champing at the bit to make this particular trip. For another thing, Ramesses' proposal was rather unequal. By asking Hattusili to come to him, Ramesses was putting his brother in the position of a supplicant, or worse, a vassal. Again, given Hattusili's political insecurity and his concerns about legitimacy, a visit to Ramesses' court might be more costly than helpful. Understandably, the king of Hatti did not immediately accept this offer. But Ramesses was not dissuaded. The king of Egypt repeated his invitation. This time, though, he did modify the destination for the meeting. The pharaoh now said, quote, "I, the great king of the land of Egypt, will go to the land of Kinahi, or Canaan, to see my brother, to look into his face, and to receive him in the midst of my land. I have now sent my nobles to receive my brother in the land of Upe." End quote. Ramesses was now willing to meet Hattusili halfway. Sort of. The pharaoh would leave his residence, cross Sinai, and come to Canaan. That was a reasonable undertaking, and it would mean Hattusili didn't have to go so far to Egypt. So that was progress. However, the power differential remained. While Hattusili might enjoy a slightly shorter trip, Ramesses still offered a summit on, quote, "my land." Again, the king of Hatti would need to come before the pharaoh, like a vassal to his master. The meeting, it seems, never took place, Although Ramesses dispatched envoys to the land of Upe near Damascus, there is no evidence that Hattusili ever journeyed to meet the pharaoh. It's not explicitly clear why. Texts from Hatti suggest that the great king often suffered an illness or inflammation, especially in his feet. It is possible that such a problem flared up around this time, making long-distance travel difficult. That is one explanation. I suspect that the true reason was the prestige problem, that meeting the king of Egypt on his territory would seem tantamount to submission. I suspect that because in the letter I just quoted, Ramesses extends his modified invitation to meet. Then he pivots to another topic. In the next section, the pharaoh mentions another ruler, the king of Ashur, or Assyria. Regarding this king, Ramesses said, quote, "Concerning what the king of Ashur has written to Hattusili, that, quote, 'you are only the substitute for a great king,' end quote." The text is damaged right here, so we only get a part of what Ramesses was quoting. But it sounds like the Assyrians had insulted Hattusili, declaring him a usurper of a legitimate monarch. That was true, as we'll see in a moment, but you can imagine that Hattusili was not happy at such words. And if the Assyrian king was willing to say that publicly, then the king of Hatti clearly had an image problem. With that in mind, I would guess that Hattusili did not want to meet Ramesses on his turf. Whether it was pride or self-preservation, the optics of going before the pharaoh were simply too volatile. The matter was quietly dropped. We hear no more of these proposals in the diplomatic archive. On current evidence, it seems the great kings did not meet in person. That's a shame. Imagine the spectacle of that summit, all the pageantry, the legions of bodyguards and chariots, the finely dressed courtiers, the musicians and dancers, the food and the drink. Had the two kings actually met, it could have been a party of special magnificence. I would have loved to see that. While the summit did not occur, that did not mean relations soured. Far from it. In the aftermath of the treaty, the archives from Hattusa reveal dozens of messages sent from the Egyptian court. These letters are mostly good wishes and gift exchanges, not a lot of historical detail, but they are noteworthy as evidence for the relationship developing between the courts, and they are significant for who sent them. For example, one letter came not from Ramesses, but from his queen, the great royal wife Nefertari. Nefertari, or Naptera in cuneiform, sent a letter to her counterpart in Hatti, the great queen Puddu-Hepa. The message went as follows, quote, "Thus speaks Naptera, great queen of the land of Egypt, to Puddu-Hepa, great queen of the land of Hatti. For me, your sister, all is well. For you, my sister, may all be well. I have now heard that you have written to me to ask about my well-being. May the sun god and the storm god praise you. May they cause peace to flourish, and to give good brotherhood to the great kings of Hatti and Egypt forever. I also am at peace, and I am in a state of sisterhood with you likewise. Behold, I, Nefertari, have sent you a greeting gift. It is in the hands of Pirikhnawa, the king's messenger. The gift includes 12 garments of colorful fabric, in excellent quality and in royal quality, and one necklace, multicolored, made of fine gold, with 12 strands, that weighs 88 shekels." End quote. These letters often include receipts detailing the gifts which are being dispatched. On the one hand, it's partly a display, look at the wealth I am sending, but it's probably also an insurance. Given how long these messages were traveling, several months at a time, you didn't want anyone sticking their hands into the pot, so to speak. By carefully itemizing the gifts, each ruler could check what was sent against what was received, a practical concern across such vast distances. Nefertari's message is rather generic. Good wishes, sisterhood, I hope you are well. But the gift that she sent was staggeringly valuable. Nefertari accounted the necklace at 88 shekels, which is about 826 grams of gold. At the time of writing this episode, 826 grams of pure gold would be valued at approximately $113,000. Needless to say, it was good to have a friend like Nefertari. We also have messages from princes, sons of Ramesses II, who got involved in the diplomatic affairs. In one message, a prince calling himself Sutek or Seth Her Kopeshef wrote directly to King Hattusili. If you haven't heard of Sutek Her Kopeshef, don't be alarmed. It is actually an alias for the king's eldest son, normally called Amun Her Kopeshef. For some reason, the prince modified his name when corresponding with the Hittites. It may have been an attempt to build bridges, because the Hittites would have recognized Sutek as their storm or weather god. The deity Amun, by contrast, may have been a bit more abstract. That is speculative, but the prince, Amun Her Kopeshef, seemed to modify his name in different contexts. In this letter, the prince sent a gift to Hattusili, whom he addressed as my father. Writing as Sutek Her Kopeshef or Shuta-Hapshap in the cuneiform, the prince said the following, quote, "Thus speaks Shuta-Hapshap, the son of the great king of the land of Egypt, to Hattusili, great king of Hatti, my father. Behold, I have sent a gift to my father as a gift of greeting. It comes by the hand of Pirikhnawa, the king's messenger, and it includes 1 drinking cup of fine gold, with the face of a bull whose horns are of white stone, and whose eyes are black stone. The weight of this cup is 93 shekels of fine gold." End quote. Again, not a lot of historical detail. But damn, that drinking cup weighed 93 shekels versus the 88 shekels of Nefertari's necklace. Roughly speaking, that would be 872 grams of gold, or about $119,000. The Egyptians were laying it on big for their foreign counterparts. Obviously, there was a degree of generosity and a wish to build strong bonds, but clearly there's also an element of display. The Egyptians were showing off their proverbial wealth, that they could so casually distribute items of such incredible value. The letters from family members tend to follow this pattern: good wishes, general pleasantries, and a gift. There's really not much historical detail, but they are a lovely insight into the relationships of the distant courts. It's also fun to see how Egyptian names, converted to cuneiform, reveal some aspects of their pronunciation. In these letters, we do not meet Ramesses II, Usirmaadra. Instead, we hear about Ramesses Wasmuria. We don't hear about Nefertari, but Naptera. And we don't hear about Seth Her Kopeshef, but Shuta-Hapshap. So for the language enthusiasts, these letters are an excellent resource. The wealth on display here is quite remarkable. The Egyptians really committed to a show of generosity and a display of the abundant riches of their country. Anyway, after the treaty, the Egyptian and Hittite royal families began communicating directly. They established bonds of goodwill and family, calling one another brother, sister, and even father. Things were going well, at least initially. Of course, becoming one big family did not mean happiness and harmony forever. And like most brothers, the great kings also quarreled. A particularly grave challenge to their relationship arose in the form of a fugitive, someone that had fled from Hatti and eventually made their way to Egypt. Hattusili wanted this runaway back, not just for his own control or prestige, but because of who the runaway was. Hattusili had lost track of his nephew, a man named Urhi-Teshub. Urhi-Teshub was the son of the late king Muwatalli II, and legally he was the rightful king of Hatti. When Muwatalli died, the Hittite throne had passed to Urhi-Teshub, and he had ruled Hatti for approximately 7 years. For a time, things were smooth. Hattusili served his nephew and governed various territories of the empire. Alas, Urhi-Teshub did not trust his uncle, and the two had gradually fallen out. Eventually, Hattusili rebelled. He defeated his nephew in battle, and then took him into custody. This made for a tricky situation. Hattusili could not simply kill his nephew, an anointed king, nor could he keep him at court, where the deposed ruler might gather friends and strike back. Stuck between two bad options, Hattusili decided to exile his nephew, packing him off to a provincial governorship in Syria. This was more like a polite house arrest. Presumably, the idea was to placate Urhi-Teshub with a position of some authority and prestige. Simultaneously, Hattusili could keep him under guard and far away from the royal court. It didn't work. Urhi-Teshub did not take to his comfortable exile. First, he seems to have sent messages to the great kings of Babylon and Assyria, presumably asking for assistance in reclaiming his throne. When that went nowhere, Urhi-Teshub did what any prisoner might do. He packed up his things and fled. Apparently, the prince escaped from Syria and made his way to Egypt. We first hear about this in a letter sent by Ramesses II to the Hittite court. In that message, the pharaoh said, quote, "I, the great king of the land of Egypt, have heard these matters about which you wrote to me. Concerning the matter of Urhi-Teshub, no, I have not done that which you wrote to me about. The king of Hatti writes to me repeatedly concerning Urhi-Teshub, and he says, 'Let the great king of Egypt have his infantry and chariots take Urhi-Teshub out of Egypt. The great king should not allow this fugitive to become strong and wage war against Hatti. That is what the king of Hatti wrote to me.'" End quote. The letter begins in the middle of things. Clearly, Hattusili had heard that Urhi-Teshub fled to Egypt, and he now demanded his extradition. The king of Hatti wanted Ramesses to put all of his resources onto the problem, and apparently his concerns were quite explicit. "Do not allow Urhi-Teshub to attack me." Ramesses' response was surprisingly coy. The king continued, quote, "To that request I, Ramesses, said, 'What have I done? Have my lips articulated plots? Where would I acknowledge Urhi-Teshub as a king? The word that men speak to you, Hattusili, is worthless. Do not trust in it. I am, happily, the brother and at peace forever with the great king of Hatti. I have taken the oath, and I will not abandon it. In your heart, do not trust the false words that you have heard. There is no sense in that. I am forever in the good relationship of brotherhood with the king of Hatti." End quote. Pharaoh's response is remarkably crafty. First, the letter is noteworthy for what Ramesses doesn't say. While he reports Hattusili's accusation that Urhi-Teshub is in Egypt, Ramesses neither confirms or denies that. Additionally, regarding the threat posed by the exile, the pharaoh avoids that issue. He says things like, "What have I done?" as if this were a matter of Hittite business, in which he had no interest. And when it came to Urhi-Teshub's status as a great king or exile, Ramesses merely said, "Where would I acknowledge him as a ruler?" Simultaneously, the pharaoh invoked the bond, by treaty and oath, that existed between him and his northern counterpart. He specifically mentions the brotherhood and peace that exists between him and the great king of Hatti. However, there might be a wrinkle here. Ramesses' letter says that he is in brotherhood with the great king of Hatti. But technically, Urhi-Teshub was a great king of Hatti. Even if his power was diminished, he was still an anointed monarch. While Hattusili had taken the title of great king of the land of Hatti, his legitimacy was still dubious. If you'll allow me to indulge some speculation, this letter might be walking a fine line between two sides of the conflict. On the surface, Ramesses promises his ongoing brotherhood and support to the Hittite ruler. But given the unstable political situation, the pharaoh may have given himself options about which great king he meant. Perhaps I'm reading too much into that, but if Urhi-Teshub somehow reclaimed his throne and resumed his earlier status of great king, then Ramesses might arguably have maintained his oath, just not to the great king one would expect. Speculation aside, the pharaoh certainly played dumb. He made no promises either way about Urhi-Teshub's location or his plans. As we'll see in a moment, Ramesses' words were a smokescreen. The Hittite prince was in Egypt, but initially the pharaoh took a plausible deniability approach. He did not admit the exile's presence, and where possible, he shifted Hattusili's attention to other aspects of the problem. We don't know exactly what happened next, but another letter gives a hint at Hattusili's response. Notably, this one comes from Hattusili himself, in a message that he sent to Babylonia. Hattusili wrote to the great king of Babylon, reporting on his dispute with Ramesses. He said, quote, "My enemy, presumably Urhi-Teshub, who escaped to another country, went to the king of Egypt. But when I wrote to Egypt, saying, 'Send me my enemy back,' he did not do so. Because of this, I and the king of Egypt became angry with one another." End quote. I love this letter. It reads like a high school gossip fight, Mean Girls for the 13th century. Receiving Hattusili's message, the Babylonians apparently responded in kind. According to the Hittite archives, the king of Babylon, quote, "sent away the messenger of Egypt." That is, they expelled, or at least refused to meet with any of Ramesses' envoys. The situation was borderline hostile. You have to wonder if Hattusili even contemplated war. Ramesses had played coy with Urhi-Teshub's presence in Egypt, neither acknowledging nor denying it. Later, though, we do get confirmation. In two letters sent to the king and queen of Hatti, Ramesses reported the fugitives' movements. The pharaoh said, quote, "Behold, I do not understand these words that you have written to me about Urhi-Teshub, these many, many words, which are certainly unworthy to be heard. You say, 'Bring Urhi-Teshub back into the land of Egypt.' But truly, I do not know where he is. He has flown like a bird." End quote. Ramesses appears to be responding to multiple messages with contradictory requests. First, Hattusili had said, "Send Urhi-Teshub out of Egypt," but now he was saying, "Take him back to Egypt." The pharaoh's tone is almost snarky, but amid that there is a key piece of information. Ramesses let slip Urhi-Teshub had been in Egypt, and now he had fled. The next part of the story is murky. It seems that Hattusili learned of Urhi-Teshub's departure, and he dispatched one of his sons to capture the prince in Syria. The son did so, apprehending Urhi-Teshub near the land of Amurru. Alas, having done so, that son promptly died. Urhi-Teshub then bribed his captors and escaped once more. The whole thing starts to sound a bit comical. It would make a good film. As a result, Ramesses had some choice words to say about Hattusili's authority over his vassals. If Urhi-Teshub had been captured in Hittite lands, but still managed to escape, that raised questions about the king of Hatti's servants. The pharaoh said, quote, "Concerning Urhi-Teshub, may it be that he went to the land of Kizzuwatna in northern Syria? The king of Kizzuwatna would have sent him to you. Or perhaps he went to the land of Halab, modern Aleppo. The king of Halab would have sent him to you. Or he went to the land of Kinza, also in Syria. That king would have sent him to you. Are your subjects as trustworthy as you claimed when you wrote to me? Do not trust the words you hear. There is no substance to them at all." End quote. Ramesses attempted to poison the mind of Hattusili against his Syrian vassals. Diplomatically, this was actually a fair question. If Urhi-Teshub had made his way to Hittite lands, then somebody must be sheltering him, and if that exile could bribe his captors so easily, then Hattusili's vassals were not exactly following orders. From a modern perspective, it all sounds rather farcical. The pharaoh comes across a little bit salty, even manipulative, and Hattusili seems righteously irritated at the situation. However, we should try to imagine things from the ancient perspective, especially that of the great kings. Hattusili could make all sorts of allegations, but at the end of the day, the Urhi-Teshub affair was a damning reflection on his own authority and ability to rule. Hattusili's reputation was already shaky. He was a usurper of questionable legitimacy, and while the treaty with Egypt had given him some recognition, the flight of Urhi-Teshub and Hattusili's failure to retrieve him, that made the Hittite king look weak. Unfortunately, there are too many gaps in the story to say exactly what was happening. How much did Ramesses know or not know? When did these letters arrive? And when did the prince leave? These are still matters of speculation. But the Urhi-Teshub affair, as it is often known, is a darkly comic chapter in Egyptian-Hittite relations. I'm rather fond of it myself. For those wondering, the fate of Urhi-Teshub is unknown. He seems to have made his way to Anatolia, possibly finding refuge with family. Urhi-Teshub had a younger brother named Korunta, who might have protected him in southwestern Anatolia. That is tentative, but later Hittite records hint this might have been the case. If so, Urhi-Teshub seems to have had children who survived and carried on his political legacy. That's a tale for the Hittite historians. But while Urhi-Teshub never reclaimed his throne, he seems to have been okay. The Urhi-Teshub affair put a strain on Hattusili and Ramesses' relationship. Fortunately, it didn't last long. As the years went by and there were no further disputes, the king's interactions became positive once more. Soon, the two rulers began discussing other ways to unite their houses and courts. Eventually, in year 34 of Ramesses' reign, they would seal their brotherhood with a marriage. But that is a story for the future. Finally, we have one more tale to tell. For those interested in the human side of these events, you may be wondering, who was taking these messages back and forth between the two courts? The journey from Ramesses to Hattusa was long, probably a couple of months each way, and the envoy, or envoys, had to go carefully, carrying huge quantities of wealth to deliver safe and sound. Presumably, these messengers went in caravans and by ship, guarded by soldiers and royal attendants. But which poor chap had to do it? Had to shuttle the wealth of Egypt and Hatti back and forth? We know at least one of them from the Nile Valley. Across multiple letters sent by Ramesses and his court, a particular name keeps cropping up, a king's messenger named Pirikhnawa. Pirikhnawa is the cuneiform version of an Egyptian name. In hieroglyphs, it reads Pa-rech-nua, or he who knows how to see. Possibly referencing a sense of foresight or perceptiveness, the name is almost certainly an honorary epithet. You see, we know who Pirikhnawa was. His tomb has survived. In the 1990s, a French-Egyptian excavation at Saqqara uncovered the tomb of an Egyptian diplomat. His proper name was Netjerwymes, sometimes written Nemtimes. It means born of the two gods. The tomb of Netjer, or Nemtimes, is at the Bubastion, on the eastern cliffs of the Saqqara Plateau. This monument is beautiful. It has an inner chapel carved from the cliff, with a lovely statue of Hathor as a cow emerging from the bedrock. In front of that, a roofed structure provided a sort of shrine on the front of the monument. Within this structure, you can find images of the official's afterlife, priests present offerings, anoint statues of the deceased, and deliver them to the tomb. Netjerwymes kneels on the ground, carrying symbols of Usir, Osiris, and he gives offerings to the king of the dead, together with his queen, Ase, or Isis, and their sister, Nebet-Hut, or Nephthys. The carving is finely detailed and beautifully painted, an expensive tomb. Anyway, the official appears throughout his monument with the name Netjerwymes, but in a couple of spots he adds an epithet, Pirikhnawa, or he who knows how to see, and his titles match those of a high-ranking messenger or diplomat in the service of Ramesses II. In other words, this man is probably the Pirikhnawa we hear about in letters. The reason this man is significant is not just his role as messenger and gift-bearer, it's where he may fit in the diplomatic history. Netjerwymes, or Pirikhnawa, is mentioned on letters dating before and after the Egyptian-Hittite Treaty. In one of those letters, Ramesses talks about looking forward to the agreement, and he specifically references the envoy, Pirikhnawa, as his representative. With that in mind, it's reasonably possible this man led the embassies that negotiated the treaty. Alas, we can't confirm that 100%. The Egyptian copy of the treaty, at Karnak, is damaged right where it mentions the pharaoh's messengers. Typical. However, tiny portions of the hieroglyphs survive, and they would fit the known hieroglyphs for the name Netjerwymes. If that is accurate, then we may be able to identify the architect of the Egyptian-Hittite Treaty. Again, we can't confirm that, but the hieroglyph texts at Karnak would line up with the tomb at Saqqara and the records from the Hittite archives. Pirikhnawa, aka Netjerwymes, is well documented in the diplomatic letters and at Ramesses' court. Looking at his tomb, he had a high status, with access to the king himself. Putting all of that together, there's a decent chance we have the burial place of the man who shaped the treaty. You can imagine once a year, Netjerwymes would pack his bags, say farewell to his family, and set off on another royal journey. In a caravan or by ship, the king's envoy would make his way past Canaan and Syria before embarking on the mountainous roads into Anatolia. Finally, he would approach the high walls of Hattusili, and from its gates, Hittite envoys would come forth to meet their guest. They might greet him as Pirikhnawa, the one who knows how to see. Hittite embraced Egyptian, gifts changed hands, and another round of meetings began. An age of good relations was underway. The History of Egypt podcast is supported by you, the listeners. In particular, I would like to thank the priests, my top-tier supporters on patreon.com. These fine folks give most generously every month, and I am in their debt. I can't afford to send each of you a gold necklace or a cup in the shape of a bull, but hopefully this will go some way. My thanks to Andy and Chelsea, Chris, Terry, Niden, Carlos, Veronica, Mycost, Yen, Karen, Eric, Frank, Setnacht, Kate, Ashley, TJ, Dan, Yola, Erjan, Jean, Suyon, Aaron, Jeffrey, Dan, and Linda. And I'd like to welcome Alicia to the ranks of the priesthood. Alicia generously signed up for an entire year, which is incredibly kind. Alicia, thank you for your support. And may the memory of the Queen King Hatshepsut act as inspiration for you and your family. To everyone listening, thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you soon.